It's 10 o'clock. This is Sky News at 10, our top story. Ecuador's battle to restore order. We go inside the country, overrun with drugs gangs, with the soldiers trying to stop the violence in a series of special reports.
Reason why there are so many migrants making their way north towards the United States from countries like this is because the gangs control these areas.
Also tonight, chaos at the post office as the former chairman gives an explosive testimony at the Commons inquiry into the Horizon scandal, and still victims wait for compensation.
My personal view about post office is it's a dead duck, and it has been for years, and it's going to be a money pit for the taxpayer for years to come, and you should sell it to someone like Amazon for £1.
We're live in Ukraine as NATO countries are forced to confirm they will not be sending troops into Ukraine after Moscow responds to a suggestion by the French president. Aid rains down on Gaza as Hamas tells Sky News they have not received any proposals for a ceasefire after Joe Biden's optimism it could come next week. The royal family mourned the death of Thomas Kingston, son-in-law to Prince and Princess Michael of Kent, who's died suddenly at the age of 45. And celebrations begin to mark the 80th anniversary of the D-Day landings. Plus, we'll take a first look at tomorrow's front pages. That's coming up in our press preview from 10:30 right through to midnight. Hello there, good evening. In Ecuador, gang members use drugs and weapons to control neighbourhoods, terrorising families and forcing mass migration into neighbouring countries. And now authorities are fighting back, carrying out raids, waging a war against the narco gangs. Well, drugs in Ecuador are fueling worsening gang violence, with much of the disorder centred on the city of Guayaquil. Earlier this year, on the 7th of January, one of the most notorious gang leaders escaped from La Regional prison. His breakout led to a 60-day state of emergency. Well, 2 days later, on the 9th of January, masked gunmen broke into the studio of the public television channel during a broadcast, forcing staff to the floor and leaving several injured. The following week, the prosecutor investigating the TV attack was shot and killed near his home. Well, in the first of a series of special reports, our chief correspondent Stuart Ramsey travelled to Guayaquil.
Police sweep through neighbourhoods where drug gangs have ruled with impunity. Ecuador's never seen anything like this. The police never came here before. Not anymore. The drug gangs have been recategorised as terrorists, so the security forces have pretty much carte blanche to do what they like. They swarm into apartment blocks, forcing their way inside. For some, it is clearly terrifying. A man and his children cower on the floor as officers storm in, telling them to stay where they are. They've done nothing wrong. Indeed, nobody was arrested in this sweep.
The police are going house to house, door to door, going into apartments, but people are very unhappy about what they see, obviously, an invasion of their privacy. But the police say they're going to look for drugs and they're going to look for gang members wherever they want to. As I say, people outside are unhappy, and then people here are unhappy too.
Outside, young men are held with their hands above their heads while they're searched and questioned. Their families start objecting. It's tense, and the police are uncompromising.
We all have mothers, they're my children, they have family, all of them. We're not into bad things, no one here is. We're all good, hard-working people. All of us here work, we're good people, there's nothing here.
The commanding officer is absolutely resolute in his belief that these operations are bringing about change. Local objections, just part of the process to stamp out gang power.
Obviously they are upset, because police couldn't come here before and they could do as they pleased. There was no control. It was all indecency in that sector. We now control this territory and there is respect. So, no matter how much they hate our police work, we're now in control, and that's a fundamental part of us winning this war.
These anti-terror operations are virtually continuous, day and night. Everyone gets caught up in this, and it's frightening. But Ecuador is in many ways fighting for its future. The country is being used as an international transit hub for cocaine by Mexican drug cartels. The gang's influence has spread throughout society, and there is a feeling here that if the authorities don't take back control of Ecuador, it will become a failed narco state.
This operation is called Plan Phoenix. It's an $800 million exercise in trying to bring law and order to the streets of this country. Reason why there are so many migrants making their way north towards the United States from countries like this is because the gangs control these areas and terrorize people. So people have enough of the gangs and leave. Sort of operations like this, with the support of the United States, are to try to make life more normal here so that people stay. They're all linked.
Through dimly lit streets, a convoy of military trucks and pickups wind their way through another barrio in Guayaquil, Ecuador's second city and drug smuggling capital. They fan out, banging on doors. They're after gang members, drugs and weapons. It looks like a war zone, and in many ways it now is. The government has declared war on the gangs and their drug cartel controllers. The soldiers are led by Secret Service officers who have specific intelligence from informants.
Seems that somebody's been arrested with weapons. Just trying to locate where they are.
We catch them up. They say a gang member has been caught and is held while soldiers search his home. A bag of cocaine beside him. Gang members are often paid by the cartels with small bags of the drug, which they sell on to make hard cash. A woman, we believe is his partner, clearly upset, comes out with 2 children and calls to a neighbour to take them in. Soldiers say another gang member escaped.
The gangs make it complicated because they have people who tip them off as we approach these areas that are hard to access.
The suspect is taken away and put in the back of a truck with another man. He's trussed up and put face down. Their treatment is hardcore. It's designed to be. They're sending a message to the gangs that things have to change here. But Ecuador is taking on the world's most powerful drug cartels, and the cartels rarely lose, especially when demand for their drugs in the USA, Europe and Britain remains so high. Stuart Ramsey, Sky News, Guayaquil, Ecuador.
And we'll get our second instalment from Ecuador tomorrow as Sky News gains rare access to a prison in the coastal city of Esmeraldas.
Taking control of the prisons is widely regarded as the key to cracking the problems caused by the gangs and the cartels. Taking them off the streets, imposing discipline. Including instructing them to chant slogans praising their country, is all part of the strategy to weaken the gang's hold of the barrios. Whether it will work or not is far from certain.
An investigation by MPs into the post office scandal today turned into blame and recrimination by the top executives. Tonight, the post office has issued a statement denying claims that the chief executive, Nick Reed, has ever tendered his resignation, as alluded to during today's evidence. Not what the sub-postmasters want to hear, of course, as they still wait for compensation. Sky's business correspondent Adele Robinson has more.
My personal view about post office is it's a dead duck, and it has been for years.
The man still holding post office to account, Alan Bates, his crusade not yet over.
It's going to be a money pit for the taxpayer for years to come, and you should sell it to someone like Amazon for £1.
At a hearing into why compensation for wrongly accused sub-postmasters is delayed, calls for independent oversight.
Get rid of post office out of any of these schemes.
Amid multiple reasons for delays, the post office was described as incompetent and inefficient.
What's emerged is a damning picture of the post office being far too slow in delivering financial redress for victims, as well as disagreements over when it can be delivered. But unfortunately, at risk of overshadowing all of that is this ongoing he said, she said row.
On one side of that, former Post Office Chair Henry Staunton sticking to his claims the government told him to stall on compensation.
It'll all become clear when I speak to the Select Committee.
And yet it didn't.
I remind witnesses that they are obliged to tell the whole truth to this committee.
With conflicting arguments from both Mr Staunton and the current Post Office Chief Executive Nick Reed.
Nobody in my team or myself has received any instruction from the government about slowing down compensation.
Do you believe the former chairman is lying?
Well, I don't believe it's true.
So you stand by
Absolutely.
what you've said in public, that compensation payments should be slowed down to minimise the financial liability?
Yes, I do.
And then, just before the end, another revelation, that CEO Nick Reed was in fact under investigation and had wanted to resign over pay.
This was an investigation not into me, this was an investigation made into the Chief Executive, Nick Reed.
Have you ever tried to resign as Chief Executive of the Post Office?
No. Why do you say that?
Outside, stunned former postmaster Chris Head, critical all this is distracting from the victims.
It's just extraordinary. I mean, what we've heard today is, blowing things. It's like somebody set off a hand grenade into that select committee this afternoon, and we have to be careful that we don't allow this to overshadow the victims in this, the postmasters, who might now be pushed to one side while this row drags on.
But despite apparent chaos at the top of the post office, a simple message from the man who continues to spearhead this fight.
There is only one priority in all of this, and that's, as I say, get the money out to victims now.
Adele Robinson, Sky News.
The head of NATO and the leaders of Germany and Poland have all said they have no plans to send troops to Ukraine. Their statements coming the day after the French President Emmanuel Macron warned that sending Western ground troops into Ukraine should not be ruled out. Well, the Kremlin reacted to the statement, saying a direct conflict between the military alliance and Russia would therefore be an inevitability. Well, let's go to Sky's international correspondent John Sparks, who joins us from Kyiv. And President Macron, John, saying he wanted to maintain strategic ambiguity, as he put it, but flat denials elsewhere on this.
Yeah, Macron has been rebuffed by just about everybody. But you know what? This is exactly the sort of discussion I think President Zelensky and his team here in Ukraine want Western countries to be having. I mean, their argument here is that they're already doing the job of NATO by fighting the Russians on a European frontier. This is what NATO was designed for. And at the moment, they are struggling. They are under real pressure. Of course, they have had to pull out of this key logistics hub called Avdiivka, and I can tell you that in the last couple of days they've also retreated from a couple of villages in the same area. So the situation is critical. I mean, how could NATO troops help? Well, you could send them to the north, to the Belarusian border. That's inactive at the moment. That would free up Ukrainian units to then move to the east to fight the Russians. Is that going to happen? Very, very unlikely. Telling comments, I think, from the German Deputy Chancellor today. He had some advice for France. He said, if you really want to help Ukraine, then send more weapons. They're not going to countenance NATO troops on the ground here in Ukraine. But you know what I think Macron's doing? He's highlighting the gap between what Ukraine has and what Ukraine really what it needs. It is facing critical shortages at the moment. And countries in Europe, the UK as well, they can't meet those shortages on their own. And you know what? The Russians know that, and they are trying to press the advantage right now.
John Sparks, live there in Kyiv. Thank you. A Hamas official has tonight told Sky News that the group is yet to receive a formal ceasefire proposal, despite President Biden's claims that a deal is close. The US president suggested the fighting could end, at least temporarily, as soon as next week. Well, the start of Ramadan around the 10th of March is seen as the unofficial deadline for a deal. But President Biden has said he hopes a ceasefire will be in place by Monday. Hamas took 253 Israeli hostages on October the 7th and still holds 134 of them, according to the Israeli embassy. Senior sources close to the talks say a draft proposal would see 40 released in exchange for 400 Palestinian prisoners held by Israel. There would also be a 40-day pause in the fighting, the first since a week-long ceasefire back in late November. Well, the deal would see 500 aid trucks entering the Strip each day, the same level as before the war, and the repairing of life-saving hospitals and bakeries. From Jerusalem, our Middle East correspondent Alistair Bunkle reports.
In Gaza, they're looking for help from above. Airdrops are now one of the only ways to get aid into the north for the thousands who are stuck there. Today, along the water's edge, Palestinians scramble through the sand to reach some desperately needed food and medicine. Each parcel, successfully retrieved, is carefully cradled and taken back to waiting, hopeful families. A central part to any negotiated pause in fighting between Israel and Hamas will be the access for humanitarian aid into Gaza.
There is no flour, no gas, no wood for burning. I send my daughter in the morning to stand in the queue at the bakery to get a bundle of bread. Sometimes she comes home without anything, so the children don't have bread.
The US president had offered hope to Gazans, praying for a diplomatic solution to the war.
My hope is by next Monday we'll have a ceasefire.
But despite both sides being under pressure to agree a deal, a senior Hamas official has told Sky News tonight that significant differences remain between the two sides.
It is a wishful thinking, maybe because of internal political affairs in the United States, to release some of the tension around the Democratic parties in the year of the election. But practically, this statement has nothing to do with the reality. Until now, we didn't receive any formal proposals, and I think there are still gaps between what we are calling for, what we are demanding, and what is proposed from the other parties.
Today, Benjamin Netanyahu and his wife met the family of a young Israeli soldier killed in the south of Gaza on Saturday. Despite the sacrifices being made by both sides, the fighting goes on and Netanyahu remains resolute that Hamas must be destroyed.
I want to hold you and strengthen you in the knowledge that we will not give up until we achieve complete victory over our enemies. This is a principle for the rest of our lives. This is what Naria died for, and this is what will happen.
Israeli soldiers have posed with their flag on top of a building in Khan Yunis. It seems to be a message of military defiance and victory. But what it just reveals is the complete destruction of Gaza's second largest city. If Israel plans to allow Palestinians to return home as part of a deal, then this is what they'll be returning to. Alistair Bunkle, Sky News in Jerusalem.
Buckingham Palace has announced that Thomas Kingston, the son-in-law of Prince and Princess Michael of Kent, has died at the age of 45. Earlier, and apparently unconnected, Kensington Palace announced that Prince William had pulled out of a memorial service at Windsor Castle for personal reasons. Well, I'm joined now by Sky's royal correspondent, Rhiannon Mills, and certainly sad news for the royal family today, Rhiannon.
Well, it's been described as a great shock to the whole family. And yes, Thomas Kingston is not a name that many of us would have heard of, but it is greatly sad for the extended family. He was only 45 years old. He was found dead on Sunday, and now an inquest will be carried out into his death. It was only in 2019 that he married Lady Gabriella Windsor. And today, his parents-in-law were actually surrounded by other members of the royal family. The Prince and Princess Michael of Kent were attending a memorial service for King Constantine of Greece, actually at St George's Chapel, where their daughter and son-in-law got married back in 2019. I think they obviously wanted to attend this memorial service. It was a big family event. It was Queen Camilla who was leading the family today, of course, because King Charles is unable to attend any of these big family gatherings. Also, the likes of Prince Andrew and Sarah Ferguson were there along with Princess Anne. But someone who wasn't there was Prince William. And that's what we've been talking about for most of the day, the fact that he had to pull out of going to that event for what was described as personal reasons. This evening, we were told that it wasn't due to the death of Thomas Kingston. But also earlier in the day, I think the palace were very keen to try and offer some kind of reassurance, saying that it wasn't also necessarily because of the Princess of Wales. Of course, she is still recovering from abdominal surgery, but the palace was saying that actually she's doing okay. But I think it shows the quandary for the royal family at the moment. If any of them change any plans, there is inevitably great speculation about why that is. And I think no matter how much they try and calm and offer reassurance, that's very difficult where there continues to be this huge global interest in the health matters of both the King and the Princess of Wales.
Rhiannon, thank you. The BBC has apologised to the family of the young person involved in the Hugh Edwards scandal over the way it handled their complaint. The corporation was accused of not acting quickly enough after taking 7 weeks to put the allegations of inappropriate behaviour to the presenter. Our arts and entertainment correspondent Katie Spencer reports.
Tonight at 10,
Initially, Hugh Edwards' name was kept out of the press, fronting the BBC's flagship News at 10 for 2 decades. As one of the BBC's highest earners, the corporation now admitting that allegations made against him were handled sensitively, but far too slowly. It was 7 weeks before Edwards was spoken to, and only after headlines like this emerged. Claims made by concerned parents that a BBC presenter had paid out more than £35,000 for sexually explicit photos of their 20-year-old and had been doing so since they were 17. As prominent BBC figures like Jeremy Vine and Nicky Campbell came forward to say it wasn't them, Edward's name was being so widely shared, in the end his own wife revealed it was him.
While Edward's family asked for some space at the time, saying he was suffering serious mental health issues over the stress of it all, the corporation launched a review to see if it had made any errors in how it handled everything. And months later, now admitting they should have acted quicker, saying they've apologised to the family at the centre of the scandal.
The inquiry ultimately finding the complaint wasn't escalated quickly enough to senior management here.
I think the BBC say, look, we do have good policies and processes in place, but we know that there are now things that we could do better to improve them and that we're going to take steps to improve those processes. I don't think the reputation of the BBC is going to be significantly damaged by this case.
A separate internal investigation into whether Edwards brought the broadcaster into disrepute is thought to be ongoing. Regardless of what that finds, the BBC holding its hands up for being far too slow to act. Katie Spencer, Sky News.
Tonight, Sky News has launched the Voters Panel ahead of this year's election. We've spoken to people from right across the country who voted Conservative back in 2019. These are the people, and millions more like them, who will decide who will be the next government. Here's our Deputy Political Editor, Sam Coates.
Today, we launch this. The Voters Panel. Dozens of 2019 Conservative voters, the people who will decide the next election. They're going to be telling us directly what they think over this week and next, a UK first with the polls to YouGov. Now, it's an online community from across the country, more than 30 different seats representing England, Scotland and Wales. All of the people that you see here voted Conservative in 2019. So much of what's happening at Westminster is a fight over these voters. Where will they go? Well, let's see. Now, of the 33, only 9 say that they're likely to vote Conservative at the next election. Now, that would be a devastating blow to the Conservatives' chances of forming the next government.
We need a seismic shift in politics in this country.
They have promised so much about stopping immigration and
protecting the NHS, and I just don't feel that they've done enough.
Now, it's not much kinder when we asked what words they associated with Rishi Sunak. Yes, articulate and intelligent, but look, weak, rich and untrustworthy are all amongst the most common terms used. Now, what about Keir Starmer?
I just don't get him. He comes across as being awkward, mealy-mouthed. He doesn't connect.
I wouldn't really say he's a Prime Minister in waiting. I would just sort of say he's just there.
But you've got to look hard for good news here. Aspiration and suitable, yes, but that's dwarfed by indecisive, uninspiring and unbelievable. But these voters, the people who made Boris Johnson Prime Minister in 2019, don't need to love Keir Starmer for him to win the election.
Almost all these voters angry about the state of the nation. If Rishi Sunak loses them, he loses the keys to number 10. Will they give his party another chance? We're going to find out. Sam Coates, Sky News.
Sam Coates there. Well, there's the prospect of another by-election headache for the Conservatives. MPs tonight approved a motion to suspend the former Conservative MP Scott Benton from the Commons for 35 days. Mr Benton, the MP for Blackpool South, was removed from the party last year after an undercover investigation found him offering to lobby ministers on behalf of gambling firms. The suspension will trigger a recall petition which could lead to a by-election. The COVID inquiry arrived in Cardiff today, where it was revealed that ministers used WhatsApp messages to discuss official government business. One former health minister, Vaughan Gething, was criticised for using disappearing messages, which meant his WhatsApps were automatically deleted after a certain period. Now, the owners of the Crooked House, known as Britain's wonkiest pub, have been ordered to rebuild it after it was destroyed last year. The pub in Himley near Dudley burned down just 2 weeks after being sold to new owners. Sky's Midlands correspondent Becky Cottrell has this report.
Beloved because of its unusual slanting structure, Britain's wonkiest pub was not just a tourist attraction, it was also part of the Black Country's heritage. But the Crooked House in Dudley was gutted in a suspected arson attack last summer after being sold to new owners. And 48 hours later, it was demolished without permission from the council. The backlash from distraught locals prompted a national outcry. Now the owners have been ordered to give the community back its tilting treasure.
I just can't express my feelings today. Excitement. I'm so excited about it all. I couldn't believe what happened to it. I couldn't believe that day when the devastation affected all of us.
Former employee John Hutchinson was delighted when he heard the news.
And there's been a few tears shed this morning, and it's really nice to be back here on site again, knowing that this news has come out and is out in the open. I'm looking forward to going in and pulling a pint and serving the rest of the team their first drink in the pub.
The councillor have said the pub must be built back to what it was before the fire within 3 years. The owners now have 30 days to appeal that decision. Recreating the 260-year-old building will be costly, especially imitating its signature slant, which was originally caused by disruption from mining. West Midlands Mayor credits campaigners and the council's efforts to resurrect the pub.
They've taken great legal advice, they've been absolutely certain, and they've been determined, partly because there has been such a sort of outcry from local residents for whom this has been a sort of attack on their heritage, their history, and that's why the local authorities responded.
Investigations are continuing into the fire. 6 people have been arrested and released on bail, but locals are willing to be patient to get back their off-balance boozer. Becky Cottrell, Sky News, Dudley.
A national event marking the 80th anniversary of the D-Day landings will take place in Portsmouth this summer. Veterans who are now all aged over 90 will gather alongside current members of the armed forces. Today, 2 British veterans were presented with plaques to add their names to a commemorative wall honouring those who took part. Sky's Alice Porter has been speaking to them.
When the time came for the paratroops to bail out, only a very small percentage of the troop carriers had been lost.
It was the largest invasion ever assembled. Around 160,000 Allied forces landed in Nazi-occupied France. It was the beginning of the end of World War II. Now 13 D-Day veterans from the UK and Allied countries are being added to the Normandy Memorial Wall in Portsmouth including Stan Ford and John Roberts. Both men have been presented with their named bricks. John served in the Royal Navy, and on the 6th of June 1944, his ship was the front of the D-Day convoy.
The army got ashore quite relatively easy to begin with, and it was an hour or two before the Germans really woke up. We actually fired, I think, in the first hour, 150 rounds of our 4.7-inch guns.
But now, war is sadly not a thing of the past.
Well, I'm very depressed that I think World War I and II, they were going to be the wars to end all wars. And here we are now with 2 or 3 or 4 wars going on.
The importance of marking D-Day was brought to life by Michael Caine's final movie, The Great Escaper, which tells the true story of a Royal Navy veteran who snuck away from his care home to attend the 70th D-Day celebrations in Normandy. John Roberts played an extra in the film. He and Michael Caine shared stories about their service in Korea. The number of surviving D-Day veterans may be dwindling, but their legacy continues to be remembered around the world. Alice Porter, Sky News.
Well, that was Sky News at 10. Coming up, we'll take a first look at tomorrow's newspapers in the press preview. Tonight, joined by the journalist Jenny Kleeman and the PR consultant Alex Deane. Among the stories we will be discussing, this on the front of the Financial Times. Thames Water pushes for higher bills, the paper says, lower fans and the right to pay dividends. That and plenty more, of course, when we come back. Well, this is Sky News. In just a moment, the press preview, a first look at what is on the front pages. First, though, our top stories. Well, Sky News has been on patrol with authorities in Ecuador, where a state of emergency has been in place since last month to combat drugs gangs. An investigation by MPs into the post office scandal turned into farce today, with the evidence of top executives descending into blame and recrimination. And as aid drops into Gaza, a Hamas official has told Sky News tonight that the group is yet to receive a formal ceasefire proposal, despite US claims of an imminent deal. Well, hello there, watching the press preview, a first look at what is on the front pages. Time to see what's making the headlines then, with the journalist and broadcaster Jenny Kleeman and the PR consultant Alex Deane. Super to see both of you. With us from now to midnight, I should have said as well. Anyway, to the front pages, let us kick off with The Sun. It leads with the BBC's apology to the parents at the centre of the Hugh Edwards scandal. The Daily Telegraph leads on the UK blocking a French bid to send NATO troops to Ukraine. Indefensible, says the Daily Mail, as it's reported the government doesn't plan to increase defence spending. The Eye newspaper splashing on Labour failing to win over some 40% of voters. The FT says that Thames Water wants to increase bills, face fewer fines and enjoy higher dividends. The Guardian reporting on the woman who says the Conservatives don't take sexual assault seriously. The Metro revealing the Chancellor's plan to increase the price of a 20 cigarette pack to £16 in a bid to combat smoking and vaping. Well, don't forget, by scanning the QR code you'll see on screen during the programme, you can check out the front pages of tomorrow's newspapers while you watch our guests. So let's head to Jenny and Alex. Right mix of stories there. On the day we hear there may well be another by-election headache, possibly for the Conservatives. The Eye is leading on Labour not yet convincing the electorate. 40% of target voters, Alex, I found.
Yeah, and this is reflective of the panel that Sky has put together of people who voted Conservative in 2019, who would, broadly speaking, fall into the target voters that Labour needs to reach out to. People who voted for Boris but would be thinking about or potentially willing to vote Labour. And the poll that the Eye shows us from YouGov suggests that not a majority, but a good chunk of them are not yet convinced. And one of the interesting things about that is it may feel strange for us as politicos, but the traditional change of government in this country is made by direct switching. People who go from one of the main parties to the other one. Right? And so for all the excitement we often see about a third party coming into new heights and so forth, the main thing that determines elections in this country historically is people going Tory to Labour, Labour to Tory. Yeah.
And the Lee Anderson affair and reform is part of that mix of, the third party coming in there. But this is fascinating, isn't it? You've talked in the past about Labour, having to go electorally small,
sure,
so they don't take flack and they don't get noticed.
Yeah.
Harry Cole, political editor of The Sun, talked about carrying a Ming vase over a minefield, which is what the next year is going to be for Labour. But does it matter that they're not convincing everybody? They just need to convince the right number of people.
Well, yes, and what this is not suggesting is that the Tories are in any way securing that 40%. I mean, this has been, the Tory support among these blocs has collapsed. These blocs identified as the patriotic left, Workington man, the disillusioned suburban, or Stevenage woman. I mean, God, these pollsters, where do they come up with all of this? But, it's not like these people are saying, yes, I'm going to vote Tory, or even that I'm going to hold my nose and vote Tory. They're not going to vote Tory. They're not enthusiastically embracing Labour. And I think, the real problem that the Labour Party will have over the next few months is a sense of complacency. Because the polls show them so far ahead, any sense that they've got this, that this is licked, there is a sense, I think, in the wider country that the Conservatives are not going to win, but whether or not Labour is going to win and win conclusively enough either to have a majority or to have a workable majority in Parliament that will allow them to put anything through is another matter.
Yeah, but it's interesting. The person who was responding on the Sky panel who said, Keir Starmer, I don't really think of him as a future Prime Minister. He's just sort of there. I think that reflects a lot of what people think, as reflected in this poll. Support for Labour isn't really... It's widespread but shallow. There's no real depth to the idea that, there aren't real passionate Starmerites out there saying Keir Starmer's my man in a way that they did, for whatever you think of him. Some did for Corbyn, nowhere near enough in the electorate, but some did. Lots of people did for Tony Blair, enough to form a complete majority. Yeah. And, like him or not, people really did for Boris Johnson.
Yeah, so are we seeing anti-votes? So 2019, was it actually anti-Corbyn as much as
well,
it was
this is the whole thing.
Boris Johnson?
I think a lot of 2019 is presented as a sort of giant storming endorsement of Boris Johnson.
And Brexit.
It was actually also, for a lot of people, it was people who said, I cannot vote for Jeremy Corbyn. I'm a left-wing person. I would count myself a Labour voter, but not if that's what Labour is. So you have to see that election result as a combination of both enthusiasm for Boris Johnson and complete dislike for Jeremy Corbyn. There are lots of people who really did like him, but there are a lot of people who would have voted Labour who felt, I cannot vote for Labour with him in charge.
It's easy to underestimate the extent to which the environment has changed between the last election and this one. The predominant factors in the last election were basically BBC. Boris, Brexit, Corbyn, all gone.
Fascinating. Anyway, just a quick run through the Guardian front page before we move on to the Post Office, Jenny. Tories putting party before sexual assault claim, says an alleged victim. So
yes, I mean, as you would imagine, there aren't many specifics in this story, but there is an alleged victim of what the Guardian is calling a serious sexual assault by a Conservative MP, have spoken to Pippa Crerar of this studio.
This parish,
who has said that there was very little will to investigate, that the party was more concerned with protecting its own reputation than formally investigating or looking after her welfare, even though her mental health deteriorated to such an extent that they did spend £15,000 on private treatment for her at a hospital. But she's saying, she's spoken to The Guardian saying that no other organisation would take no action if an individual came to them with an issue like this.
If you are the victim of a serious assault, as this made out in this piece, or even if you know about someone who has been, the right thing to do is to go to the police. And the police have made it clear, in post Sir Richard Enrique's inquiry, that whilst they don't automatically assume that they're going to believe the person who brings a complaint to them, because the presumption of innocence still applies in this country, they take things seriously and they'll investigate something. The thing that a party dreads the most is being seen as covering something up, and that's why I think the risk for any party trying to deal with something internally, if something like this came to a party that I was involved with in the decision-making process, I'd take it to the police myself.
Yes, although there is a lot of reasons why women would feel very reluctant to go to the police, especially given that the conviction rates for sexual assault are 0.6%, and you go through an enormous amount. Perhaps she went to the police as well. We don't know enough details about this. She may have gone to the police and also told the party. So it's not necessarily an either-or in this situation. We don't have the details.
But in those circumstances, any employer, I know that you don't exactly employ an MP, but take the point, any business or organisation is entitled to say, I'm going to see what happens with the police investigation. And we don't know whether the person took a complaint to the police. We don't know when it was either, but, we don't know whether this complaint was investigated by the police at all.
Yeah, OK. The other story on the front page of The Guardian, there, right-hand column, bottom, former Post Office chair, I was the target of a smear campaign. Well, what an extraordinary session that was in Commons today.
Incredible. Someone was lying today. Someone was lying under oath because they said things that directly contradicted each other.
Well, did they? Anyway, carry on.
Well, they did. You have...
all just a big mistake.
Henry Staunton saying he's a victim of a stitch-up, and in fact this investigation was in fact into the Post Office CEO, Nick Reed, and he said he was perfectly happy in his job and had never wanted to leave, and according to Staunton...
He said he'd never offered his... Well, the statement tonight says he had never actually offered his resignation.
The issue is...
And the chair suggested that Nick Reed had privately said to him that he was thinking of quitting.
Yes.
So the two can be...
And the issue is this is about compensation for the postmasters, and again, the focus is no longer on them, it's on the infighting. And the postmasters who were interviewed throughout the day on Sky News and other outlets all seem to say that they believed Staunton and Staunton's account that their pay offer had been delayed. That was their experience.
It's natural and I've been involved in various campaigns and organisations, and I've seen plenty of them in business life too. It's natural for anyone, from patient groups to aggrieved to equitable life, to believe the worst thing about the people who are responsible.
Well, can you blame them
for something running them? Well, in this example, the point I was going to make was, in this example, I think, how would you feel if you were a postmaster or the descendant of a postmaster who's died before this has been fixed, hearing about Reed being paid a basic salary of $436k a year, hundreds of thousands on top of that in perks and top-ups, complaining about his salary too, and then the fallout is obviously between the chairman and the chief executive, more interested in bickering with each other than they were in seeking a resolution to this. The only thing I thought was quite amusing was the idea, a guy who comes out and says, the Secretary of State told me, in the most high-profile political environment of our time, right, 4-part documentary, dominates the headlines. That person told me to do something. I haven't got any evidence to turn out, but they told me to do something that was absolutely torpedoing for their politics. And I've been the subject of a smear campaign. pull the other one.
Well, and you know, you never know if the Nick Reed stuff was sort of dead cat diversion.
Yeah.
If so, it kind of worked, didn't it? The Sun front page, the BBC saying sorry to the family in related to the case of Hugh Edwards.
This is a profoundly disingenuous headline because it suggests that the BBC is saying sorry as a result of the allegations that were published in The Sun. And in fact, what the BBC are apologising for, there was an investigation that Deloitte undertook. They're apologising for their complaints procedure not being very good. That what happened was the family of this person in question went to complain at the headquarters in Cardiff of the BBC, and whilst the complaints were taken on board, they were not escalated quickly enough. This entire furore was avoidable. This family felt that they had been let down. They went to The Sun after they felt that the BBC had not taken their complaint seriously. That is what the BBC is is apologising for. You could walk past this newspaper in a newsagent and think that the BBC was apologising for the allegations that The Sun printed last summer, which they are not.
I'm a bit more sympathetic to The Sun, not least because it does say failures over complaint on the front page. But I take your point. It's not that small unless you really need glasses. But I mean, I take your point about the main headline saying what it says. But the point really is exactly as Jenny says in her summary, that if the BBC had taken this more... Unlike what we just discussed, there's no suggestion of criminality in this.
Yeah.
It was someone going to an organisation saying, could you please stop this man sending tens of thousands of pounds to my child to send them graphic images? Well, the BBC might have been entitled on one view to say, I don't think they would, take a libertarian, laissez-faire attitude and say, he can do what he likes, it's his private life. But the point was, they basically ignored the story, didn't escalate it to senior execs. They didn't escalate it,
but you have to imagine how many people complain to the BBC, must complain to the BBC about high-profile figures all the time.
Like this, though?
Yes, I'm sure they do. I'm sure they do, and I'm sure some of those things are quite often made up.
I mean, that is the allegation, which seems to have not been fully investigated yet, because the BBC is suggesting that Hugh Edwards is not mentally fit yet enough to...
There's an internal HR investigation.
So that's all still underway, isn't it?
I was making the point that the organisations have slightly more to do in these environments, perversely, because there's no allegation of criminality. So it's not actually a matter for the police to investigate. There's not going to be a police investigation. So it is more upon the employer at that point.
Yeah. Got the Times in. You might have noticed we were missing a few papers as we read through them. Here we are. You've made your point. Now end the protest, says cleverly. The Home Secretary has told pro-Palestinian protesters to stop their regular rallies because they've made their point. Just quickly.
This is to do with the cost of policing these protests, which is apparently...
And the Lee Anderson fallout, you
And the Lee Anderson fallout, yes. I mean, the thing is, the cost shouldn't necessarily be a factor in all of this. The fact that a very large number of people are protesting suggests there's a large amount of public
and disruption
feeling.
to the capital, some have said.
Yes.
I'm all in favour of peaceful protest. I'm not in favour of people stopping up the roads and making main termini for terminuses for trains being unusable, as has been happening week after week in our capital.
OK, plenty more newspapers to come, including the headline from The Telegraph. UK blocks Macron's bid to send troops to Ukraine, discussing that summit after this.
What we're doing right now is we are going out to some of the remotest parts of the Svalbard archipelago where polar bear mums are in their den still, tucked in with their still growing cubs. And we're setting up remote camera systems. We're setting up both high definition video systems and then simpler trail cam systems. And we're trying to get information on when polar bears come out of their dens, what they do when they're there, and what condition they're in. When polar bears are born, sometime around the first of the year, they're about the size of a human fist or a stick of butter, is another way to look at it. They are blind and hairless. They need that protection of the den, and they need their mother's really fat, rich milk so they can grow quickly and get to the point where here pretty soon, within the next couple of weeks, they'll start to emerge from their dens. And that mom is going to make her way back down to the sea ice where she can eat. Here in Svalbard, we've seen average winter temperatures increase as much as 7 degrees C, and that is dramatic. In places I've spent most of my career, I've seen sea ice go from being close to shore, where I could see it within a few miles in a given year, to now that same place, that same ice is 400 to 500 miles offshore. You're talking about dramatic change, dramatic habitat loss across the Arctic. One of the most important parts of a polar bear's life is that maternal denning period. It's that critical time when these young cubs are at their most vulnerable. So we need to learn as much about what they require from us in terms of a lack of disturbance, in terms of the habitat that they need to be successful there. If we don't have cubs coming into the population, we're not going to have polar bears around very long. So we really need to protect the mums and cubs. Every morning here from on out, we get up pretty early, check the weather, and if it's a go, which today is a classic day of maybe, we will load up with the search and rescue helicopter team here, and we will head out to a den site to deploy cameras. It's an all-day operation. When we get back, we have to get the gear set up for the next day's deployment. And I should mention, we wouldn't be here at all without our partners at Norwegian Polar Institute and our partners at San Diego Zoo, who work closely with us on this project.
Well, welcome back. You are watching the press preview. With me tonight, the journalist Jenny Kleeman and the PR consultant Alex Deane. Welcome back to both of you. The Daily Telegraph reports that the UK has blocked Macron's bid to send troops to Ukraine. So too have a number of other nations, including NATO itself. Yeah. So what was the French president doing as part of his summit?
Well, I think he was saying that sending troops on the ground is not to be ruled out. There are lots of, there are many different justifications for him saying that. Maybe he was trying to suggest that nothing is off the table. But we all know that Putin has said that as soon as there are EU, NATO boots on the ground, then it's a full-scale war. And of course, everybody else is going to back away. But this is the sort of conversation that Ukraine wants us to be having. You have the US aid package stalled at the moment. Ukraine is stuck and something has to give. So whether or not this was a rhetorical device or a political device or a serious plan remains to be seen.
The relationship at the heart of the European Union normally sees France and Germany speaking very politely about one another and what they say, not on this occasion. The German position expressed by the Deputy Chancellor was immediately no chance, right? So we're very clear, right? That won't be happening. So it's interesting. Telegraph says UK blocks Macron's bid. FT says Berlin blocks Ukraine's bid. Depends on, he pays you money, he takes your choice. Yeah. Either way, there's no interest at the moment in the NATO alliance in making that conflict one that draws in NATO parties directly. But I think Macron's point is welcome, at least to one extent. We are currently failing Ukraine, and if you want Ukraine to do better, you've got to help them more. If that's the broader point, I think that's right. And the fact that it made Germany immediately say what we need to do is give more weapons instead, that is actually really quite welcome. So whilst Macron's position might have been a blundering one, it might have had a good outcome.
Got 1 minute left. Can we do two stories?
Sure.
I'm not sure. Anyway,
Jenny,
FT.
Yes.
The other one. Anyway, carry on.
Thames Water, customers of Thames Water are going to be delighted by this. Its collapse is imminent, apparently, and wants to be able to charge higher bills, lower fines, and want to pay more dividends. It's £18 billion in debt. I mean, the mismanagement, the cheek of all of this, privatisation of the water companies has failed. There you go. I said that in about 10 seconds.
So straight to the wonkiest wonkiest house or the wonkiest
Yeah,
pub.
thank God the people who took down the Crooked Well. Absolutely disgraceful that they knocked it down, and then there was a fire. What a bloody coincidence! They've been ordered they've been ordered to rebuild as it was and where it was. It's what the Italians do with opera houses when they burn down, and it's quite right we do it with the Crooked House.
But it's quite funny. How are they going to build it exactly as it was? I'd love to see the documentary about that. How to make it crooked.
Absolutely. Oh, should think about that one, shouldn't we? Jenny and Alex, thank you both very much indeed.
Thank you.